Current Australian Bureau of Statistics data paints a bleak picture of socio-economic disparity between First Australians and the rest of Australian society. While these statistics evidence the inequality that First Australians experience, they're based on mainstream socio-economic and political frames of reference. While these statistics importantly highlight the lack of equality, they don't address First Australian socio-political frames of reference, such as sovereign and human rights to self-determination and justice in terms of the colonial history of oppression. That is, census data tells us about equality, but not about equity, or in other words, census data does not tell us about social justice. Nonetheless, the census data does provide us with important information that's needed for critical engagement in these issues. The First Australian population is approximately 2.5% of the total Australian population and is much younger overall than the non-Indigenous population. As illustrated by the graph above, the First Australian population has a different age structure to the rest of the Australian population. In common with many other developed countries, the non-Indigenous population of Australia is ageing, whereas First Australian peoples are experiencing increased growth in younger age groups. Over half of the total First Australian population live in New South Wales and Queensland. Despite this, First Australian peoples make up a small minority of the total population of these states, 2.5% and 3.6% respectively. In the Northern Territory, by contrast, while total numbers are relatively small, First Australian peoples constitute 26.8% of the total population. Slightly more than one half of the First Australian population lives in areas classified as major cities or inner regional areas, compared with almost 9/10 of the non-Indigenous population. 1/4 of First Australian people live in areas classified as remote or very remote in relation to having very little access to goods, services and opportunities for employment. First Australian people's life expectancy appears to be similar to that of people in developing countries. Approximately 30 years ago, life expectancy for Indigenous peoples in Canada, New Zealand and the United States was, like First Australian peoples today, significantly lower than that of the respective non-Indigenous populations of those countries. However, significant gains in life expectancy by Native Americans, First Nations Canadians and Maori people have been made in recent decades. Today, Australia has fallen significantly behind in improving the life expectancy of First Australian peoples. First Australian people remain the least healthy population group in Australia. Suicide has become increasingly prevalent over recent decades, accelerating after the 1980s. In 2010, the suicide rate for First Australian peoples was 2.6 times the rate for non-Indigenous Australians. The graph shows that First Australian people in the Northern Territory have the highest suicide rate of all jurisdictions, followed by South Australia, Western Australia and Queensland. As we shall see as we work through the remaining topics of this course, these states are areas where First Australian peoples are under the most socio-political pressure. For example, the Northern Territory intervention, now known as the Stronger Futures policy in the Northern Territory, the closing of First Australian communities in Western Australia, and the pressure of mining companies on remote and discrete First Australian communities in all 4 states. Statistical details of school education highlight the educational disparity between First Australian and non-Indigenous Australians. What's interesting about these statistics is the sole focus on formal schooling in English, reading, writing, spelling, grammar, punctuation and numeracy, and the complete lack of focus on the formal and informal cultural learning, knowledge and languages that many First Australian people bring to the classroom. First Australian people were about 3 times more likely than non-Indigenous people to be unemployed. Over 56% of First Australian people reported an equivalised weekly household income between $200 and $799. In comparison, 51% of non-Indigenous people reported an equivalised weekly household income of between $400 and $1,249. First Australian people have been grossly overrepresented in the criminal justice and prison systems for decades. Between 2013 and 2014, First Australian imprisonment rates increased by 10%, reaching the highest number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander prisoners since 2004. The lowest proportion of First Australian prisoners in 2014 was in Victoria at 7.8% of the prison population. The highest proportion of First Australian prisoners was in the Northern Territory at 85.6% of the prison population. The rates of First Australian children entering the child protection system are much higher than the rates for other children. In 2013-2014, First Australian children were 8 times more likely as non-Indigenous children to be receiving child protection services. As shown in this graph, neglect is the most commonly substantiated form of harm for First Australian children. First Australian children are similarly overrepresented in the Australian out-of-home care system. In 2012-2013, approximately 34% of all children in out-of-home care were identified as First Australian. This statistic is astounding considering that First Australian people are just 2.5% of the overall population. First Australian children were 10.6 times more likely than non-Indigenous children to be in out-of-home care nationally. Current socio-economic circumstances have not come about by accident in recent times. In more accurate, localised and regionalised historical accounts, there is clearly documented overwhelming evidence of the purposeful engineering of socio-economic gaps throughout the colonial and national history of Australia. Some people reject the idea that First Australian people's oppression has been engineered, suggest that it was a terrible mistake or accident because people didn't realise what they were doing, or that it wasn't as bad as some people make out. In the face of the documented evidence, these arguments are no more than denial for denial's sake. Socio-economic gaps have been engineered over a long period of time. To understand the diversity of current socio-economic circumstances for First Australian peoples, we need to have an understanding of the complex historical circumstances that have led to the current situation. We do need to focus on positives. How are we improving and what practices are supporting that improvement? We also need to critically understand why some things are getting worse. Current research and policy reviews, such as the 2015 Close the Gap report, clearly provide evidence that the situation is not improving, but in fact worsening. We need to ask some hard questions. What are the relationships between the people measured by the statistics and the other people that make up that society? Does that relationship perpetuate socioeconomic gaps? These questions are at the heart of the socioeconomic circumstances that First Australian peoples experience today.